Australia is selling off our military footprint. In February 2026, the government announced one of the most significant shake-ups of Australia's defence estate in decades. Dozens of bases, barracks and training sites have been earmarked for divestment. Some sit on prime inner-city land, others anchor regional communities. Together, they represent billions of dollars, layers of history, and serious strategic questions. Today, we're going to unpack exactly what's being sold, why Defence says it makes sense, how serving members, veterans, and analysts are reacting, and the bigger strategic question that sits underneath it all. Is this smart reform or short-term thinking in a dangerous world? I'm Pikos, and today we're talking tactics. The future defence estate. In February 2026, the government released the Defence Estate Audit, which was commissioned following the 2023 Defence Strategic Review. It looked into sites owned by Defence around the country and made recommendations as to whether these sites were still useful, utilised properly, or unnecessary to our current needs. The audit recommended 68 sites to be divested, and the government agreed to fully divest 64 of those sites, partially divest 3, and retain 1. And this is not a small tidy up of a few empty sheds. We're talking about former barracks, rifle ranges, training areas, administrative facilities, vacant land parcels, and legacy infrastructure that no longer align with the Australian Defence Force's force posture. Some of the most high-profile examples include elements of Victoria Barracks in Sydney, Victoria Barracks in Brisbane, and Victoria Barracks in Melbourne. These are 3 historically significant sites located on extremely valuable inner city land. But not every site is being bulldozed. As I mentioned, some are earmarked for full divestment, others may be partially retained, and some may be consolidated with units relocated to larger, more modern facilities. And there are a few heritage listed properties in here which can't be demolished. In the description below, I've linked to the full list of properties that are identified in the audit. The revenue expected to be generated from the sale of these properties is about $3 billion. But the costs involved in remediating the sites and getting them ready for sale is reported to be around about $1.2 billion, so the total profit expected is around $1.8 billion. Why Defence is selling. The Department of Defence manages one of the largest property portfolios in the country. Over decades, basing decisions were made for strategic, historical, or political reasons that no longer match today's operational requirements. And maintaining aging infrastructure across dozens of low utilisation sites costs money. Real money. There are security costs, maintenance costs, utilities, compliance, heritage preservation, remediation, and staffing. That all adds up quite quickly. Right now, we're in a strategic environment where every dollar is being scrutinised. We're spending billions on new capability acquisitions, base upgrades, and there is pressure to increase defence spending overall. The argument from Canberra is simple. Why spend scarce defence funding maintaining empty or underused land when that money could be redirected into capability? The ADF is shifting towards a more concentrated, northern-focused posture, investing heavily in air bases, training ranges, logistics hubs, long-range strike capability, maritime operations, and AUKUS-related infrastructure. In that context, sites that no longer house operational units or are only occasionally or rarely utilised become difficult to justify. The government's stated intention is that proceeds will be reinvested back into defence infrastructure and priority projects. In other words, this is an attempt to trade legacy footprint for future capability. The reactions. The reaction to this announcement has been mixed. On paper, estate rationalisation makes sense. Resources are concentrated and assets become liquid and are redirected into capabilities that work for future strategic directions. And then huge swaths of developable land opened up to building new housing, something that we are in dire need of during this housing crisis. Some of these sites are in prime inner city locations that is just begging to be utilised better. But defence property is not just land. It's history, its identity, and for many Australians, especially current and former serving ADF members, it's home. Among currently serving members, the reactions tend to be practical rather than emotional. There are questions like, will this affect readiness? Will this make remaining defence locations less secure? And is the relatively small amount of profit generated worth it for the time, effort and costs required to remediate some of these sites and make them safe for public use? One of the sites reportedly under consideration is not a fully abandoned base, but empty land at the back of Defence Establishment Berrima in Darwin. The plan, from what I've heard, is to retain the active military component, install a rear boundary wall, and release the land at the back for civilian housing. But placing dense civilian housing directly up against the rear boundary of an active defence site changes the risk profile overnight. Noise, surveillance lines, access control, protest risk, even drone activity all become more complicated. Secondly, that empty land is not entirely dormant. It's occasionally used for training and other defence purposes. Once houses go in, that flexibility disappears. And thirdly, there are parts of that back area that remain taped off with restricted access due to debris and hazardous materials, some of which have been sitting there since Cyclone Tracy. Remediation will not be optional. It will be necessary, expensive, and closely scrutinised. Then in Tasmania, approximately 15 sites are set to be sold off. Almost all of the defence facilities on the island. From a strategic standpoint, this doesn't seem wise. While the Anglesey Barracks will remain, the dramatically reduced facilities could leave military personnel having to travel to the mainland for live fire training. It could reduce recruitment or disrupt families who may now be separated for more and longer periods of time due to travel requirements. For veterans, the reaction can be more emotional. Sites like Victoria Barracks are not just infrastructure. They're part of Australia's military story. Generations trained there, deployed from there, returned there. When land that carries that history is put up for sale, it can feel like something intangible is being lost. Some veterans groups have called for stronger heritage protections, memorial preservation, and guaranteed public access to historically significant elements of these sites. It's not always about preventing sale, but ensuring that history is not erased in the process. Among defence commentators, the debate is more strategic. Supporters argue that this is overdue reform. They say that defence has carried excess estate for decades, tying up capital in land that does not directly contribute to combat power, and freeing up billions for northern infrastructure, hardened facilities, and capability sustainment makes sense. But critics warn against short-term thinking. They argue that strategic uncertainty is increasing and that once land is sold, reacquiring it in the future would be politically and financially difficult. There is also skepticism about whether proceeds will genuinely remain within defence or gradually disappear into consolidated revenue over time. For non-military communities, reactions often depend on economics. Some see opportunity, housing, commercial development, and urban renewal. Others worry about traffic, overdevelopment, or a loss of green space. In some regions, a defence base is an economic anchor. Even a partially used site can support jobs, contracts, and local business activity. There is also a number of reactions that say the $1.8 billion expected profit is a drop in the bucket compared to the funds the ADF actually needs to properly fund itself. As to where I sit on the topic, generally speaking, I am supportive of selling off surplus government land. If land is genuinely not required for future operational use, then releasing it for housing and reinvesting the proceeds makes sense in my book. As has also been pointed out, in the overall defence budget, the $1.8 billion raised is probably modest. We are not talking about a transformational injection of capital in the grand scheme of the total defence spending budget, but the housing component matters in my eyes. Australia has a shortage of developable land. If we are serious about addressing the housing crisis, the government has to release more land, approve more development, and stimulate the construction sector to lift productivity and actually build homes at scale. From that perspective, converting genuinely surplus defence land into housing supply is logical public policy. And if that also generates an extra billion or so that can be reinvested into defence infrastructure, that is sensible asset management. We need to sweat our assets harder. We need to pull as many levers as we can. But, and this is the critical point, The land must truly be surplus, not politically convenient, not temporarily underused, not strategically valuable in 10 years' time. If it is genuinely not needed for future defence requirements, then we sell it. But if there is any realistic chance it will be required later, we need to think very carefully about letting it go. Because once it's sold, it is gone. And it's going to be pretty hard to get it back if there's a 10-story apartment block on top of it. Redevelopment options. These sites are in the process of being handed over to the Department of Finance, who will manage the divestment process. And so the next question becomes unavoidable. What should this land become? Many of these sites sit on prime urban land. Others occupy strategically located coastal or regional areas, and once they pass out of defence hands, their future use will shape communities for decades. I think there are 4 likely uses for these sites. Residential development. The most obvious and politically attractive option is housing. Releasing large parcels of inner city land or well-connected land for residential development could significantly increase supply. That means apartments, townhouses, mixed density estates, potentially thousands of new dwellings depending on zoning. From a macro perspective, more land supply helps stabilise prices, stimulates construction activity and supports economic growth. If these sites are genuinely surplus to defence needs, converting them into housing is rational policy. But the scale matters. Planning decisions matter. Infrastructure integration matters. Dumping land onto the market without a coordinated plan risks underutilisation. Done properly, however, this could be a meaningful contribution to housing supply. Beyond pure housing, some sites could become full-scale urban renewal precincts. Integrated developments that combine residential, commercial, retail, public transport and civic infrastructure. These projects can reshape entire suburbs. They could incorporate public parks, sports facilities, schools, health services and community hubs. In some cities, these sites are among the last large tracts capable of delivering meaningful public open space. Urban renewal is not just about density, but long-term livability. There is another option that receives less public attention: strategic industry and defence adjacent use. Rather than fully converting land to civilian use, some sites could be retained in a different form, supporting defence industry or adjacent capability. They could become home to advanced manufacturing facilities, munitions productions, drone testing zones, cyber and electronic warfare centres. Australia is starting to beef up missile production, so maybe these sites could be sold to private defence companies who are supplying defence. Companies like Thales, Lockheed Martin, Naya, and plenty others could benefit from close proximity to ADF locations. Instead of maximising immediate sales revenue, government could prioritise long-term industrial resilience and capability growth. We may see less short-term cash, but it may generate greater long-term strategic value. Finally, there is heritage. Some defence sites include heritage-listed buildings and carry deep historical significance. Parade grounds, drill halls, memorials, century-old buildings. For veterans and communities, these are not interchangeable real estate assets. A balanced model may involve partial redevelopment while preserving historic cores. Converting significant structures into museums, cultural spaces, or commemorative sites would ensure military history remains visible and accessible. Where buildings are heritage listed, redevelopment will necessarily need to occur around them rather than through them, but in some cases, it might make sense that the entire precinct is set aside for full historical protection. The strategic question. So, where does this leave us? On one level, this is straightforward. If land is genuinely surplus, sell it. Reinvest in future capability and strengthen our northern bases further. And in turn, support the nation's housing supply. This is rational policy. But the deeper issue here is, should defence land simply be sold to the highest bidder? Or should it be treated as a long-term national asset, even after it leaves military hands? Because once it's gone, it's gone. Urban land near major transport corridors, ports, airfields and logistics hubs will only become more valuable over time. It will only become more politically difficult to reacquire. If this is done carefully, transparently and strategically, it could be remembered as smart reform, a mature decision to align assets with future needs. If done poorly, rushed, or narrowly focused on revenue, it risks becoming a missed opportunity. So, let me know what you think. Is it a good decision to sell off parcels of defence estates? Which locations do you think should be kept? And what should be developed on the sites after they've been divested? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. That's it for today. I'm Mel Pikos, and we've been talking tactics.